Let's get started. I'm gonna give Robert plenty of time as he's got a lot of information to give to us. First of all, I want to thank all the attendees for coming in. I'm always happily surprised when we have such a robust audience, number of people that tune in to this talk. So I appreciate people taking the time to do this. I get a lot out of this webinar series, and I learned more than one thing every time because the speakers we've had are fantastic and have a lot of experience and knowledge that I think is useful for everyone else. So let's get started. Robert Lim, I appreciate, Robert, you taking the time to give this talk. I'm going to give him a brief introduction and then pass it over to Lynn. I won't go too deep into his bio because he has a slide to discuss it. But Robert is the, I guess, in between outgoing and current CEO of OSRL, and he's been doing that job a number of years. I won't go through the details of his background, but he is a chemical engineer, and I know that becoming a chemical engineer is about the hardest thing there is to do because I did it about 30 years ago, and I spent every waking second of my time in college working, and it was such a relief to get through that effort. So Robert, thanks again for doing this, and I'm gonna let you give some more information about your background. But Robert's going to talk. And this is the first seminar I think we've had with somebody who gets their hands as dirty as Robert does actually responding to oil spills. So he's going to go through a number of case histories for some of the recent spills that have occurred internationally in the last couple of years. So I'm really excited because I've looked through his slides and I think there's going to be a lot of useful information in that. But he's the first person that's gone through some of the case histories on the webinar series, and every time I hear someone like Robert talk, it's always kind of very useful information, very interesting. So I look forward to that. So with that, I'll turn it over to Lynn to kind of give us kind of the rules of the road for the webinar that we do each time, and then we'll turn it over to Robert. Lynn.
Okay. Yeah. Thanks, Tim. So our webinar is held every first Tuesday of the month from 10 a.m. to 11:15 a.m. U.S. Houston time, and occasionally we'll change to the second week of the month due to holidays. But that's the normal time we'll have the webinar, and just look out for the invite I sent over. And for the talks, so the speakers will have about 1 hour to talk, and we'll leave 15 to 30 minutes for questions. And the questions can only type in through Q&A button, and I will monitor the questions through the talk, and you don't need to wait until the end to type in the questions. So if I see any questions during the talk relate to the topics, I will just jump in and ask the questions. So feel free to type in any questions during the talk. And last thing I want to remind everyone is that we are recording the audio and video of the webinar. And I put the link in the meeting invite, even though right now we only have webinar 1 to 7 in that link, but we are going to put out the rest of webinars very soon. So for that, I will give the floor to Robert.
Thank you, Lynn, and thank you, Tim, for that introduction. Tim said I got my hands dirty on oil spills. I don't claim to have done that, but I would say in a former life, I did spend a lot of time in the field and interacted with oil, not necessarily in a spill response type role, but yeah, I've been in the industry, started in Houston actually in '79, and so been working in the field pretty well across the globe, and then into various management roles through Baker Hughes, and then into Vetco, where I was the president there, and then into Total Safety, where I helped out on the international business side, and then joined OSRL in 2013, beginning of 2013. So I'm just a little over 10 years with the company, and Vanya De Stefani has taken over me as of yesterday. So she's now running the show, and I'm in the background here just providing a little bit of support if required. Through my tenure, I guess the three things I put here in terms of what we added to the response side of life was principally the subsea intervention services, which, you know, are very comprehensive, probably the most comprehensive subsea response tools spread across the globe. We developed the first jet-based dispersant aircraft system using the 727, and that's been operational since the middle of 2016. And we also put in, really as a complement to the subsea systems, but can be used for surface response, is the global dispersant stockpile, which is 5,000 cubes of dispersant spread around the globe. And the lastly, but certainly no means least, from the beginning of this year, we basically have integrated the Global Oil Wildlife Response Service into OSRL's service level agreement. That's the service response agreement, giving you access to people for preparedness and response in the wildlife side of life. Just a quick note on OSRL. We've got 40 participant shareholders. That's people who own the company, and Exxon is one of the largest of those. And then we have around 135 associate members, includes shipping, governments, coast guards, and smaller oil and gas producers and operators across the whole value chain. So that's kind of the background to OSRL. So I'll, if I may take the liberty, we've seen a significant number of spills over the last 24 months, and some of them quite challenging, responding during COVID. Of those, 5 really involve shipping, one in Gibraltar towards the end of last year, Jordan, where we're just providing technical advice, Philippines, which is ongoing, Sri Lanka, which was a nodal response, and Reunion, which was basically a technical advisory role just to recommend cleanup actions. We also had another vessel, but this is kind of a slightly different one, which was a World War II vessel sunk in the English Channel, close to the Straits of Dover, and that was leaking oil that had been in that vessel since the Second World War. So I think you're going to see more of those across the globe as these vessels age, and I know there's quite a number of them around. And interestingly, the responsible party for those is the original country that owned the vessel. So there's quite a lot of those right across the globe from the Second World War. We've had 3 FPSO incidents, some to do with basically the offloading systems, and then one process error really in the UK. We've had 3 terminal offloading failures, one in Thailand and one in Peru that we're still on. And the other one was, I believe, offshore. I'm just trying to think where it was actually, but there's another one there in the mix. We've had 5 infrastructure issues, and I think we're seeing more of these, pipeline leaks, a collapsed oil storage tank, but quite a few pipeline issues here. So that's a concern. We've had 2 process failures where the process allowed oil to go over the side or into some area that wasn't intended. And then the 3 unknown sources in Dubai, those continuous almost, come from time to time, and they seem to be emanating from Iran while they're doing some work or operations, and they seem to be able to cause a spill. And then we've had 1 capping stack pre-mobilization due to a subsea well incident in Brazil. No loss of containment, but still a serious incident that had to be, we had to mobilize the system, at least for the quayside. Mainly personnel resources and expertise, but 12 incidents have required some form of response assets to be mobilized, and 5 of them have used OSRL's aircraft surveillance aircraft. There's one in the UK, there's a couple off West Africa, and we use the C-130 in surveillance mode in Asia Pacific. So that's kind of a general overview of them. I'm going to now go into more specifics of the spills as we go forward. So the first one to look at, this happened back in 21 during the height of the pandemic. It basically was a brand new vessel called the Express Pearl that had containers on board and some concentrated nitric acid. And what appears to have ignited the vessel was that the nitric acid had dripped onto some aluminium shavings or aluminium bars, which spontaneously ignited, eventually igniting the whole vessel. But the vessel was carrying a large number of nurdles, those plastic pellets, in containers, and they got spilt into the ocean, and quite a significant release. So it was a very protracted response, and a lot of the shoreline was covered in these nurdles. We originally were mobilized to respond to the bunkers that were potentially a spill, and there was a small amount of oil released from the vessel. But the principal thing we ended up responding to was the burnt debris and the nurdles that spilled into the ocean and ended up on the beaches in Sri Lanka. So these are the activities of shoreline response, project management, a lot of stakeholder engagement with the various agencies, equipment and logistical coordination. We did a lot of shoreline surveys, monitoring and visualization. We provided guidance on cleanup for nurdles, and we're actually writing with ITOF and others a guidance manual, which I think will be issued in the next few months. A lot of issues relating to waste management, and we even fabricated equipment in the country, and you'll see some of that as we go forward here. So waste, I think this is an area that really needs more attention. I see a lot of oil spill contingency plans, but I'm not sure that we as an industry go into waste management and how we're going to handle the waste thoroughly enough, because there are a limited number of facilities that can process the waste. So what tends to happen, as you can see in this case, in the temporary storage, we collect a lot of the debris and the waste, and then it ends up in a warehouse while somebody figures out what to do with it. But obviously it's a major challenge. Segregation from the detritus of life, which is quite prevalent, particularly in the developing world, but even across the globe. And then some pretty large-scale mega pollution containers, which because of the fire, we had no markings, we didn't know what was in them, so that creates quite a hazardous response area. And then some of the nurdles fused together, which they were called nurdlebergs, and some quite sizable ones washed up on the shoreline. So quite a lot of debris there. This sort of cleanup operation is very manual, very time-consuming, very repetitive, and basically, we had to manage a lot of volunteers, mainly from the military, but others as well did join in, and you obviously have to train them and get them set up with the right PPE and segment the waste and everything else and get them to do things processing. So what you're seeing here is a trommel, as we called it, where you can separate out the sand from the detritus that you're needing to collect. And then we also tried some of these beach cleaning tools, these machines, which I don't think were quite as successful as the old trommel, but we still managed to pick up some nurdles with them, but still it needed quite a bit of tweaking to get it to work properly. What was interesting was, and what we really learned from this, is that oil spill skills are very transferable to this operation. Managing volunteers is something we do a lot of, but separating the zones, using the SCAT surveys and things like that is really key. But obviously there's no magic wand to this sort of response. Nurdles are not biodegradable, so they stay in the environment. And so, as I said, there's no real playbook for this at the time. We're trying to write something, and hopefully we'll see less of these nurdles spilled, as the IMO is also due to release in the next year or two some guidance on packaging for them to try and minimize the effect. Obviously, you know, you need to involve the whole community in these responses, and that's where the volunteer management comes in, and help them clean up the shoreline. So that was the first response, quite a challenging one. And as I say, it's through COVID, so to keep 10 people in country required something like 30 to 40 people, responders, to be available, because some of them were spending 2 weeks going out in quarantine, and some going in as well, and spending three weeks in country. So quite a challenge for that particular one. Another one that happened during the COVID era was this response for a Chevron company in Thailand. This was a damage to an offloading hose, really, and a 2,500 barrel spill off the coast of Rayong. There are some key sensitivities around there. The island of Koh Samet is a tourist island, and in fact, we had a similar spill in 2013 in exactly the same location. In that case, the response was protracted, and the oil ended up impacting the island of Koh Samet and required several thousand military personnel to basically bag up dirty sand and then take it off the island and replace the sand on the beaches there. So quite a big response in that case. The interesting one here was that, and this is always a challenge, is that in the past we'd always been dealing with the Marine Department. In this case, we ended up dealing with the Navy, who we hadn't had much engagement with, but they stepped in. They had dispersants, they were doing vessel spraying, they were doing helicopter dispersant spraying, bit of offshore containment recovery, reasonably successful, but we weren't able to get in, so we were providing advice remotely because they got the borders shut at the time because of COVID. After some time, it was decided to mobilize our Hercules dispersant aircraft, which is based in Senai in Malaysia, and we managed to get that stood up in the requisite time, but then the actual mobilization was delayed due to issues with the authorities not granting the permission to spray. And that's another thing for putting in your back pocket. Good conversations with the relevant authorities prior, you know, in peacetime is really important to getting permissions in the event of a spill. So it's really important to do that. In the end, we did mobilize the aircraft. We managed to get some dispensations for the crew from the immigration people. But when we got there, they decided that actually we didn't need to put any more dispersant down. They'd actually put a significant quantity of dispersant from the helicopter buckets. But we did mobilize in a surveillance mode, and there was a small amount of sheen there, you can see in the picture here. So they were able to respond to that. But we used basically a little SLR camera on the flight deck of the Hercules, and it was quite successful in being able to see what was happening on the response. So obviously a lot of challenges getting clearance and quarantine, trying to manage the spill remotely, and as was the responsible party, their team based in Houston and San Ramon were having to manage this remotely. Fortunately, they had one person, a Thai person on the ground, who'd moved to another job, and they sent her down to the spill area, and she's very knowledgeable on oil spill, having been in that department for quite some time. But basically, she was excellent eyes and ears. And then, you know, certainly needs to be thinking about the actions for the second crew mobilization, etc., as we go through, and that's something that we need to work around. We have put some additional steps in place to provide improved coordination of the aerial operations and improve the automatic actions that IAR can go through. And we've tested those now, and that works very well for the C-130 mobilisation. We did provide, say, remote support, so daily oil spill modelling and trajectories, processing the images both from satellite and aerial data, and we, got the satellite images from our provider MDA, and then basically providing remote technical advice for shoreline cleanup strategies, and basically providing that kind of support to the responsible party. There was a small shoreline impact, which was as predicted in the modelling, and the bulk removal took place really over a day and a half, so it was quite rapid in the intertidal area there. We did eventually get permission. They changed the law around about the 7th of the month there, and on the 8th we managed to get in country with a 24-hour quarantine, and then we were able to get down to the spill and do a SCAT survey and ensure that the endpoints were achieved and could be agreed. And then we were planning to have a closeout meeting. These are the kind of mechanical absorbent booms and just mechanical activities, but unfortunately a surprise twist at the 11th hour, another spill while they were working on the pipeline of about 5 meter cube. So we were sent down to the shoreline centre, to the command post, and help them make sure that the response was done properly. And then unfortunately that meant that the closeout meeting was postponed, but nonetheless a successful response there, which was good to see. I won't go into this one in very much detail because I think Michael Roldan went through it in quite some detail back at last year, but this was a spill that happened back in the beginning of last year in Peru, when about 10,000 barrels of crude was spilled from a damaged pipeline back Plem, while the tanker was unloading at a multi-buoy mooring. Suffice to say, we are still in country. We've had to set up a permanent establishment now ourselves, trying to get agreement on the endpoints, and there are some beaches that are still seeing some oiling, and we're likely to be in country until the end of this year, as are IUCA, because there is continuing to be small amounts of wildlife impacts, which are believed to be from this spill, but nobody can be 100% sure. So they've been asked to stay with people in country until the end of the year. So one of the features of spills we are seeing now is that some of them do go on for quite some time, and that's something that you need to be prepared for and have the resources and be able to man up for that. And that does present a challenge. Liverpool Bay, again, a repeat spill. So this one, we had a spill there in 2017. And then during a very large storm, this was Storm Eunice with gusts up to 122 miles an hour, heavy rain and everything. We couldn't get responders on the beach to begin with. And also, again, some COVID impacts during this, but we were basically involved in incident command, supporting that setup, surveillance, modelling, SCAT, shoreline cleanup and containment recovery. Approximately 100 responded days, but we did mobilise nearshore and offshore equipment and the UK surveillance aircraft to the scene. Fortunately, we had a pretty good knowledge of the shorelines because we'd done previously SCAT surveys, and we provided a lot of technical advice to the IMT. We had an established baseline from the previous response, and we were monitoring the coastline. When we could get on the beaches, we did find some minor tar boils and a bit of oiling. This crude is very strange. It's a sinker. It's a very waxy crude, actually sinks, and I think the storm actually helped. It was so aggressive that it actually dispersed the oil very readily. So we didn't need to really respond too much, but really monitor the situation and continue to conduct overflights. But the weather conditions, as I say, really created quite a challenge to mobilize the aircraft and the technical advisors, and we had to also coordinate deconfliction with the MCA, the Maritime Coast Guard Authority in the UK, and also we mobilised the RSPB as wildlife responders in case there was a wildlife incident, because this is a very sensitive area bordering onto the most kind of important big beach in that area, but there's also close to the Lake District National Park, so quite a sensitive area. As you can see, small amounts of tar balls, which were cleaned up. We did prepare a vessel of opportunity and did an assessment, and we had a containment recovery package mobilised that just in case we needed to send that offshore. In the event that wasn't required, and it's effectively a bit of minor cleanup of these tar balls was all that was required. Takeaways, lessons learned from the 2017 response were able to apply. So I think one thing here that we say in all responses is know your oil, because in this particular case it makes a big difference. Obviously, we had a lot of coordination role to play in this with various agencies, and we had a lot of pre-planning to do because we weren't sure if the numbers would need to escalate rapidly. One thing that happened during this response was that basically the responsible parties IMT got impacted by COVID, so that we had to supplant their comms team using our OSRL marketing team. So we can do that and help with that. And we also had to provide some remote support to the IMT from time to time. Moving on, really this one was at the request of a P&I club. They weren't happy with the supposed response strategy that was being promoted by the people in Réunion. So they asked us if we would mobilise a couple of people, go down and have a look at the shoreline and come up with some proposed cleanup strategies and recommendations. What happened with the vessel was it was leaving Mauritius and was supposed to head northwest, but got caught in a storm, lost power, and was basically driven southwesterly on the back of this cyclone and ended up on the shoreline in Réunion. We did the surveys, shoreline surveys, and we did one from an overflight from a chartered helicopter, because very difficult shoreline, as you'll see in a minute, and provided those detailed recommendations to responsible party. It's a very difficult and high energy shoreline with basically a lot of volcanic material on the coastline, and the vessel, as you saw, got seriously damaged and lifted up there, and trying to refloat it was unsuccessful. So you could see that it was beached fairly highly on the shoreline, and because of the high energy environment, there was very little fuel oil on the vessel, so there was only, I think, 15 meter cubed in the end that had to be offloaded. But the vessel, I think, is still there, and at some stage a salvage operation will have to be attempted. But it took 45 minutes across this kind of difficult lava field, really, to actually get to the vessel. So, you know, not an easy place to get into. And any logistics for any response also difficult, because there isn't much in the way of resourcing in Réunion to help. But on the positive side, the high energy wave action there, if you know of any spilled material, would disperse it very rapidly, and biodegradation take place. So we recommended to the salvage team to basically pump either to another vessel if they could get one close in, or into IBCs that would then need to be airlifted from the site to an area for disposal. So I believe that the latter one was the one that actually was chosen, and that's what the P&I Club and the responsive party, the responding party there, actually went ahead and did the salvos. At FPSO, seeing a few of these incidents, really, I would say this one is largely down to human error. It looked like somebody over-pumped a slop tank and ended up with oil going into the ocean in the UK. And we were asked to mobilize the surveillance aircraft and also conduct some satellite imagery through our contractor MDA. Fortunately, it was quite out at sea in the North Sea, and there was only really a minor amount of sheen. So really, it was a number of surveillance flights to monitor the situation, and then the sheen really largely dispersed without the need for application of dispersants or any other response techniques. Another spill, another one here, really around aging equipment, and maybe a result of maintenance being delayed or lack of maintenance. But what happened was a tank farm in Port-Gentil in Gabon, one of the tanks, which had 300,000 barrels of crude oil in it, Rabi crude oil, basically collapsed. So effectively the oil spilled into the bung and over the bung. And so we were mobilized to provide technical support, incident management, and also training the local responders. They did have some equipment there, which we could use in the response. And we were there for about 35 days. You can see in this picture how the oil filled the whole Bundon area and even overflowed. There was quite a bow wave, as you can imagine, and into the drainage ditches around the site. So when we got there, there was extremely high levels of VOCs, so really delayed the initial response. We couldn't go too close at the beginning, but once the levels had come down to a reasonable level where people could get into the area, then effectively we could use local resources to pump the crude out into other tanks, and also use vac trucks to clean the areas where they're outside the bundled area in the drainage channels, etc. We did conduct an overflight using our West Africa surveillance aircraft, which is actually based in Gabon. There's one based in Libreville, and the other one is in Togo in Lomé. So it made some overflights, and there was a small amount of sheen seen at sea. So it was decided to put some booms around the harbour area because in case there was any rain, there might be some more runoff. And so we put a boom system into the harbour system to secure the incident. So that's that one, but quite a serious incident with a collapsed tank, and it could have been much worse had it been raining or anything like that at the time. You could have had quite a serious spill. Moving on to the capping stack mobilization I meant, but what happened here was they had a failure of the BOP. They were in the reservoir, they had some issues with the well, some crossflow in the well, and then they lost communication with the BOP. Unfortunately, also the backup BOP on the rig was also not working. So it was decided that proactively to mobilize the capping stack in case, or when they recovered the BOP and they needed to be able to secure the LMRP if that was required. And essentially what we did it in slow time. We had to change the connector to the connector for the particular rig stack. We also worked with the Trendsetter OIM to pressure test the BOPs, but it was decided that the incident was under control. So we didn't do 24-hour operations. But what we did prove, and I was just down in Brazil a couple of weeks ago, and the responsible party gave us a very good overview of all the things they learned from it. But basically, they proved that the 5 days to mobilize the capping stack in country was realistic. One of the challenges here was to find a suitable vessel, and it turned out that really there was only one suitable vessel in Brazil. So now the responsible parties the operators down there are kind of coming together to work out how people may be able to help each other in the event of an incident like this. No hydrocarbons were released, and in the end, the cap was moved to the quayside, but was not required to be mobilized, but it was ready for immediate deployment. So this is actually the first time that this element of the subsea incident response equipment has been mobilized. We have mobilized equipment from the survey and incident response toolkit. We mobilized a chainsaw, bow saw in Brazil previously when a FPSO had a turret that was couldn't be released and was causing a problem. And we almost mobilized some additional equipment a couple of weeks ago in Brazil for another incident. So good test of the processes that were in place. We did actually add discover one additional step that has now been added to the protocols, and that is to ensure the way that we pressure test the blowout preventer, which is in this particular 15,000 PSI stack, is suitable for creating a double barrier. So the testing regime has been modified so that that is assured on the with the capping stack. So moving on, another shipping incident. This vessel was offloading in Aqaba in Jordan, and then had a failure of a bunker tank, which spilled 11 cubic meters of HFO. We were actually mobilized. It was a third-party mobilization for us. The Aqaba Special Economic Zone Authority are not members of OSRL, but they needed some technical advice, technical assistance, and some recommendations. It's a very sensitive shoreline here. Many years ago, back in the late 70s, I've been diving on this very location that this port is now located at, and it's got fantastic reefs out offshore, a lot of hammerhead sharks and things like that, but it's a very spectacular shoreline in the Red Sea. And so they were very keen to put a detailed cleanup plan together to ensure that they did that. So we had 3 people mobilized just for 3 days. They wrote a plan which was accepted by the port and for them to action. So that was basically technical advice there. Another vessel incident was basically a collision in the Straits of Gibraltar, where essentially this vessel OS-35, which was a box carrier, basically hit an LNG tanker off Gibraltar. The Port Authority basically requested the master to beach the vessel here on the shoreline, or close to the shoreline, so that they didn't it didn't sink in the Straits of Gibraltar, which would have really complicated the response. So essentially, we work with the Tier 2, often who are a member of OSRL and the Port Authority. So we mobilised technical assistance. We supported the IMT. We supported the Tier 2 organisation, and we also sent people for offshore and onshore cleanup. A lot of responder days. It started back in August, and we demobilised at the end of December. So a lengthy spill response. The salvage operation, I believe, is almost completed, and the salvors provided their own people in case of any response requirement. And significant equipment was mobilised. to the location. And we still have equipment in place there in Gibraltar because the tier 2 equipment was mobilized initially, and to keep the port open, they need to have a stockpile of tier 2 equipment in place in Gibraltar. And so we've provided that equipment for them because as many of you know, that the supply chain and, getting components to remediate equipment, the supply chain there's quite long lead items on items from the suppliers for the oil spill response equipment, particularly things like diesel engines for power packs, but spade pumps are really in short supply. So if you are wanting to get some additional equipment, you're probably looking at over a year's lead time on it. So need to be really moving forward with that as soon as possible. Again, a significant amount of responders required in this incident, and OSRL have 85 dedicated responders in our response cadre, with also people who can also back up that. So it's something like 150 responders in total. But we really need to think through whether we need to add more responders if incidents going to carry on for such long durations, or we have so many of the incidents going on. So that's something that I guess we'll be challenging ourselves about what we need to do to make sure that we can mount a response. We're set up to really respond to 2 responses with 18 people in field for each one. And the last response, just going to briefly mention here, is ongoing at the moment. It was widely publicized in the news here on the evening of the 26th of March. That was a week or so ago. It was on the BBC and right across the news in the UK. So unfortunately, oil spill response, when it hits the headlines, really does make the news. It was on every news bulletin, both on the Sunday evening through all Monday and into Tuesday. It sort of calmed down on after Tuesday when I think the quantum of what was going on, but we're still on the incident. This is the world's 2nd largest natural harbour. It's an extremely sensitive location with lots of wildlife and quite a difficult place to clean up and respond to. So we've been, I might say also that it was only a very small leak. It was from a pipeline, approximately 200 barrels of reservoir fluid, of which 80% was produced water and only 20% of it oil. We've been providing technical assistance, IMT support, tier 2 support, SCAT. We've got equipment there, we've got skimmers, we've got booms, we've got sorbent. We've been providing surveillance aircraft. One of our contractors who has drones has been doing significant number of overflights to monitor the situation. Currently, we have 23 responders in the field and 5 in the EOC, but we are in the process of down manning. I think we'll come down to about 7 responders for the foreseeable future, but they're down manning now as the cleanup is progressing well. But very difficult area to respond to. So that's that. So just really talk a little around the common themes. I think one of the things that comes out of all of these responses pretty well is having a really good situational awareness is really key to effective management of the response, and being able to readily access that information and being able to visualize what's going on is key. And we have Liam Harrington-Nissen, who works in our monitoring visualization group, and he's been putting together software. You could see the map he made in this particular case. Well, there's a much more detailed map, but that shows you where the oiling was, the red ones, and all the other sites have been visited. And as the information came in, continuously updating and a ArcGIS map of where everything was. So basically data, being able to visualize it, and obviously having domain knowledge or knowledge of the specific industry or disciplines and the industry activities are key to give those insights that can be used to form the ongoing response. With all responses, trying to get the resources in country can be a challenge. So, we do encourage people. We've got the 5x5 free. We provide the people. We provide 5 people up to 5 days. We provide all the transportation costs and everything. So should be no hesitation on your part to mobilize us if you feel you might have a response. We'd rather get there early and start to be able to formulate plans and organize the logistics. I mentioned previously, know your oil. It's quite challenging. We need to know what we're going to be responding to. That's key. And where possible, get pre-approvals in place, and not just for with the regulators for maybe the use of dispersants, if you can get that, but at least have a pre-conversation. But I also point out that some of the processes that are required before we mobilize are quite onerous and may require a lot of internal approvals within the company, operating company or responsible party. So those specifically are for the subsea equipment and also the global dispersant stockpile. So make sure you've got if you can, those things signed or pre-approved indemnities, and have somebody who can action that quickly. And one other common theme that we are seeing, and you see it with the pipelines and the tanks and things like that, is that aging infrastructure is becoming more of an issue, and possibly challenged by the maintenance, which was difficult to achieve during COVID. But we are seeing, some continuing challenges of maintaining what is an aging infrastructure. Certainly in the North Sea, and in which farm it must be 40 years old. So it's getting old and presents quite a challenge. So that's really all I have. I hope that's of some use to you, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Robert, thanks for that. I think I've said this a couple of times before, but back in the 80s, 90s, and I guess into the 2000s, there was a TV talk show host called David Letterman, and he used to have, when he had guests on that he had a personal relationship, he called them friends of the show. And Robert, you're a friend of the show. I hope you keep your toes in the water a little bit so we can, have our conversations in the future at various events that we attend together. So, but anyway, thanks so much for giving the talk. I have to tell you, I write down questions I have, and I have a number of them. And I always take the prerogative after these to ask the first few questions while we wait for questions to populate on the Q&A slide. So that's happening, and we're getting questions, but I'll ask a couple of questions. Before I do that, let me just mention, I always try to say that what the future plans are for the webinar, and we have a very robust plan for the rest of 2023. Next month, we're going to have a very interesting talk. Ed Levine has gathered together some really kind of senior U.S. Coast Guard incident commanders, and we're going to have a roundtable discussion next month, which is May. And Ed Levine is going to help, who is a recently retired science support coordinator for NOAA with a lot of experience, but he's going to help us with that roundtable discussion with incident commanders. So stay tuned for that. And then as we go to the rest of the year in June, we're going to start a series where we talk about the National Academy of Science, Engineering, and Medicine's Oil in the Sea 4 report. And so in June, we're going to have a summary overview of the report. And then each month after that, till the end of the year, we're going to go into each specific chapter. And the leads on the team that wrote that book are going to give a discussion of the details of the specific chapter. I think that carries us through till the end of the year. So I have a couple of things I want to ask you, Robert, and maybe these are maybe suggestions and something you can comment on. The first is, I was at a workshop last week that Cal OSPR held in a technical workshop, and I think I mentioned this before we started, but NOAA went through some of their incidents they had, and they showed some data on the number of incidents that they've responded to over the last several years. And then you have the incidents that you've responded to. I know Cal OSPR has incidents they respond to, ITOP has responded to. We have something inside ExxonMobil for safety incidents, and we call it mining the diamond. And so instead of just going back and doing a case history study and try to dig down into what the root cause is for safety incidents that might cause that caused a serious incident to happen where somebody was either seriously injured or killed. What we try to do in the last decade or so, we try to go into incidents that, except for an act of God, someone would have been seriously injured or killed. And so it brings in a whole different data set for us to do data analytics on, to try to determine what root causes were, because the same incidents. So it gives us a much larger database. And I'm just thinking about some of the incidents you run. For example, you had a collision with an LNG tanker, and I'm guessing the LNG tanker didn't explode, or I think you'd be talking about the explosion of the LNG tanker, because that's something that keeps a lot of people up at night. But for the act of God, the LNG tanker didn't explode, kind of thing, right? So it's going into that kind of instance. So, when I hear about these incidents, I think there's data that maybe we aren't trying to do kind of data analytics on to find root causes, and maybe we could find large seeds and help us with, spill prevention. And so this is, you can comment on it. I think it's a suggestion for this larger group, that there's all these large databases of the organizations like yours that responds to spills. And let's go down and look at the ones, except for an act of God, it could have been much worse. And let's try to, because it's the same kind of analysis to do, to look at the root causes, so we can maybe do a better job of preventing incidents in the future. Has your organization, I mean, that would be something that's possible with the data that you guys have, but I think there's
yes, I mean, we've got a very rich data collection of, all the files from all the spills in that, and at the end of each spill, we write up a summary of what went well, what didn't go so well, and feed into our processes the lessons learned. So we do that. But I think that's one of the advantages of this 5x5 technical advisor, because we get to go to a lot of what would be considered minor incidents, but actually, like you say, do highlight some, what ifs, if this hadn't gone quite as well as it went, or, some other act didn't happen that, or some other act did happen that caused the thing to escalate. So I think those technical advisory mobilizations also can provide a rich data source as well. So I think it's important. The other thing that we've started to do as well is started to put together a better way of visualizing the data, particularly from surveillance data, but also SCAT data. And I think that data in itself can also help, inform how people should approach shoreline cleanup operations, because, we see in the spill in Peru that, trying to get to the end point is taking a year or more. And I suspect that in Poole Harbour, we'll be there for quite a while until we get to some agreed endpoint. So that's something that really needs careful consideration.
Yeah. And then I'm always, we've talked about this before, but this kind of advocacy for non-mechanical recovery is never ending, right? And and it really highlights the Thai military, I think, is an excellent example of, the folks in that organization that are responsible for oil spill response probably cycle through that job every 3 years. And it really shows you the importance of consistent and long-term advocacy, because you have to tell the new guy who may have not been involved in an incident ever, right? Because of the nature of that kind of business. And so this communication, education, and training is nonstop. And I really think we need to, industry and the response organizations and others need to put a lot more effort into this kind of upfront communication to make sure at least the decision makers have some of the background information that they need to make a decision. Maybe they're going to make a decision one way or another, but you don't want to, during an incident, have to go in and try to educate them on why this or isn't the best option for the incident, that you have minutes to hours to make a good decision on, because the longer you wait, the more things are going to spread and move throughout the environment. So.
Yeah, and we do a lot of forums for members and other stakeholders in different locations. We just held one in Gabon. I think that, we encourage you, if you've got areas you particularly want to have a forum, let us know, and we'll try and schedule them into the program, because I think those allow you to bring in, I know in Malaysia, when we went through a lot of work there, we got basically the Navy, the Coast Guard, environment agencies, and everybody had a big workshop with about 120 people in Kuala Lumpur that really helped get these approvals sorted out for dispersants and things like that, which we were struggling with before that. So there's an opportunity to do that.
Yeah, but I think your organization needs a lot more resources to do that in more places, more often. Because you don't know where the next event's going to happen. Yeah, I was going to ask you the capping. So the capping stack in 5 days, that's fantastic, actually. And is that the cap? That wasn't the cap. I didn't catch it. Was that capping stack mobilized from Southampton? Is that the?
No, that one's based in Brazil, and it shows you that's the Brazil base in Rio de Janeiro now. And the key thing here was that the capping stack's not on the critical path. Really getting the right vessel to deploy the capping stack, if you needed to in anger, is the key. So the cap itself is not on the critical path.
So it did not have to be pressure tested and all that?
Yes, no, it had to be pressure tested. Yeah, we had to go through all our protocols. We had to change the connector that is, you can see, connected to the SBMT. That had to be lifted with we had to mobilize 500-ton cranes to lift the cap and be able to change out the connector to E/F, I think it was, as opposed to the HC4 connector that's on it as a standard. So yeah, quite a lot of work had to be done. We did it over 12 days, but we didn't have 20. It was decided not to do it for 24 operations, but the tasks could have been done in 5 days if needed to be.
Yeah, that's another incident where, except for something happened that kept oil from going in the environment, that's kind of that would be a really important lesson learned event for industry. I'm thinking. And the last thing I'll start going to questions, but I know you have a team of modelers, and then you have incidents you modeled, and you made the comment that not sure what incident it was, maybe it's Malaysia, but the model predicted where the oil was going to go on the shoreline pretty accurately. And I wonder if there is a number of events where you have data like that we could go back and, maybe it didn't always predict accurately, and we can use that data to help enhance the model's accuracy for one reason or another. It didn't have the right parameters in it to do that. But I'm guessing you have a lot of, all these incidents you talk about, there's always some modeling going on, and then you actually have oil in the water that we can see how accurate the model was.
Yeah, that's what we typically do as a sort of almost a first step to get some modeling once we got the data. you know, we do have access to MetOcean data, but you're absolutely right. I mean, depending where you are in the world, the accuracy otherwise of that information is always questionable. There's also, you know, the impact of the weather, which can impact, you know, an incident like the one we had in Liverpool Bay, where you had some exceptional weather event, and clearly at those extremes, it's difficult to actually model exactly what's going on. But you know, in Thailand, it's a pretty well understood. The Gulf of Thailand pretty well understood what the flows were, and the model was very accurate in where it predicted the impact would be at that shoreline.
I mean, you know, I have one more thing. You mentioned the COVID challenges you had. I'm just wondering how, and I know you kind of put, at least in 2021 and maybe into 2022, the COVID protocols were very strict, right? 2 weeks in quarantine kind of thing, in and out. How successful were those in keeping your personnel from actually getting COVID?
Well, we had a few people who, you know, caught COVID on responses while they were there and had to isolate, but by and large, we managed it pretty well. We had some pretty good procedures in place. And the other thing is, and we still have them on our webpage, is country response plans. I think we wrote something like 120 different country response plans that kept up to date the protocols that were in force. And we're planning to keep updating those country response plans. So they're quite useful if you're going to a new area or you have to put some contingency plans together, to just have a quick look at those. It might have some information that could be useful to augment the knowledge there.
Okay. Listen, let me go to the questions. We have a question here, and we've been told by attorneys we're supposed to keep the questioner's name secret. So I'm not going to mention it, but you can go on and look at it if you want, Robert. So it says, very enlightening talk. Enjoy your retirement. Could you please discuss dispersant use operations around the world in the recent past, decision-making, efficacy, and monitoring? Has the stigma of Deepwater Horizon dispersant use diminished? Thoughts on that?
So that's a good question. Well, I think you raised it quite succinctly there, Tim. I mean, it's really around education. I mean, it surprises me. I go to what you would consider fairly mature organizations, you know, environment agencies and people like that, who really do not understand the nature of dispersants. They, you know, have some preconceptions which are completely inaccurate. So I think to your earlier point there, that we need to keep the advocacy up and the education up. Dispersants are a really important toolbox in the tool in the toolbox, and you know, being able to use them in anger when you need to is key. But we are, you know, seeing a lot of people, you know, a lot of jurisdictions, countries where it's very difficult to do that. That being said, some good news is that we've been helping the IMO, and I was with the IMO last Friday, writing their dispersant guidance. We've got 3 chapters now complete. There's just the last 14 pages to be finished, which hopefully will be done in this month, on the subsea use of dispersant. But then the IMO will be publishing their guidance. And I think that's really important because, you know, they are advocating the use of dispersants in the right situations, and having the IMO stamp on that with all the, you know, countries that are signatories to the IMO conventions and things is key. So look forward to getting that out. We're talking to them on last Friday. They hope to get it published by the middle of the year. So I suggest you look out for that. The other thing that's also coming, which some people may be aware of, is the RETOS tool, which basically is a way of assessing your spill preparedness or your your capabilities, and that was something developed in Latin America, and it's now going to be published through the IMO as well. They've improved it, upgraded the look and feel of it, but that'll be coming out again in the next during this year, I believe.
All right. Let me ask one more question. Your comments about the issues regarding disposal of recovered oil, contaminated debris, et cetera, should be considered as part of the net benefit analysis of response. Mechanical and manual recovery will create a large amount of material for disposal, which will have its own effects. Perhaps another incentive to consider dispersants when possible. Question mark. Thoughts on
Yeah,
that?
no, that's a very good point. I mean, it's very important, but it doesn't always play well with the environmental people. That being said, I mean, we've had instances where we were doing containment and recovery. There was a fairly major incident in Indonesia in the Java Sea about 4 or 5 years ago, where basically a well blew out and they surrounded the platform with a boom, and then we were skimming, and the skimmers could skim at very high rates, but we could only run them for 2-3 hours a day because we would run out of storage for the waste, the waste oil. So, it hadn't really been thought through. They were sending old IBCs out to these vessels, filling them up almost by hand as the skimmer collected it, then into the IBCs, then offloading them by a kind of milk round of vessels going and picking them up. But it really meant that we only got 2 to 3 hours a day where we could effectively operate the skimmers. So having a proper plan for how you're going to dispose of the oil, and it's sometimes not so easy to put it in the tanks of a supply vessel or something like that, and then have to send that into shore, which might have the skimmer on board it. So it really needs a lot of careful planning and thinking about. And what I see in a lot of plans is it's not gone into enough detail to really be able to put it into action when you need to.
What is I mean, I think the solution has to be, especially in a remote location, is you have to have something like, I don't know if you've seen the Bessie burner, but something where the oil can be disposed of at the location, and maybe offshore. And the Bessie burner is designed to be off on a floating on a platform. But there's other types of burners and incinerators that are out there. I'm just thinking the nurdles could have been incinerated, perhaps. Does OSRL have any?
No, and there aren't many around, I mean, and it's questionable whether you can use that sort of thing in some jurisdictions. I think there's only one facility in the UK that we can dispose of recovered oil from a spill, and so they're few and far between, these facilities around the globe, and that I think that Bessie burner is. I don't think it's been implemented by many people. I think it's still being sort of developed, or at least the technology's there, but I'm not sure who's manufacturing it now.
Yeah, I mean they're it's fully developed. I think they're looking for a commercial partner to manufacture and sell it. I do think there's quite a bit of advocacy effort, right? This goes into the line of non-mechanical advocacy, and in a lot of jurisdictions, I think in the United States, when you bring the oil onto a tank on a vessel, it's now considered a hazardous waste, and the Bessie burner is considered an incinerator, and incinerators have very stringent requirements for the incineration, right, and the waste stream, which I think might be challenging. So there really, if we think. I think this is a big issue, what to do with the waste generated, and there has to be, if you're going to do something other than put it in bags and barrels and totes and haul it long distances, there needs to be something like the Bessie burner is a solution for at least part of that waste stream. But I think it's going to require a lot of advocacy to allow the rules to be changed to to allow it to have less strict release requirements for the gas stream that comes out of that burner, or it's never going to be accepted. So
yeah, I think it is a bit of a challenge. There's also, the challenge with dispersants, of course, is that the window of opportunity may be narrow, depending on how rapidly the spilt oil emulsifies, etc. So, we need all the tools in the toolbox because we're never quite sure what we're going to face. And obviously, mobilizing dispersant assets and enough dispersant to some locations can also be a challenge. That's why we have the aircraft, though, that we can put down a lot of dispersant very rapidly. But you've still got to get the aircraft in place and keep the supply chain of dispersants going, which could be a challenge as well.
yeah, I mean, look, rapid decision making or speed is the key to response, and rapid decision making is part of that speed. And it's not just dispersants, right? In situ burning has a window of opportunity. If you emulsify the oil too much, you can't burn it because you spend too much energy boiling the water that's in oil and mechanical recovery. It gets very challenged as the oil becomes more and more viscous. Okay, listen, we have one more question. Can you talk about any insights you may have on how the response capability of the key industry players have evolved in recent years? Are you seeing more players leaning on the skills and resources of OSRL or continue to develop their own in-house IMT capabilities?
Well, I think it depends. It depends. It's a great word, but it depends on the company that you're dealing with. But what I have seen, and I would say this has been brought up to me by regulators, is we're getting quite a few of small, I call them one man and a dog, but that's being a bit rude to them, I suppose, but small companies that really can't mount an effective response. They don't have enough people who have either IMT knowledge, incident management knowledge, or just enough people to actually mount a continuous response. And that certainly has been worrying the regulators and testing the regulators here in the UK. And we've assisted just recently, it was the end of last month, we have introduced a mutual aid agreement under the auspices of Oil and Energy UK, it's called now, so that people can have a legal framework where they can borrow people from other companies. But I think that is a concern as those smaller companies take over aging assets. There's a secondary concern as well, that as energy transition continues, that maybe the focus on oil spill response within other operators will change. You'll see the numbers of people who have detailed knowledge reduce. And then the third thing, I think, is that actually, the training of new responders and getting people into response organisations, I know is a challenge. And we're not having a problem as OSRL at the moment, but certainly some of our sister organisations within the Global Subsea Response Network are seeing challenges of hiring people into response roles. So I think it's something where, we're going to need a much more global cooperation. Fortunately, we haven't had any Macondo type incidences, but we are seeing still incidents carrying on. And that's why I brought up the question, is the 85 responders that OSRL have going to be the right number going forward, or do we need to, in discussion with our member companies, look at a different number? We've had that debate going on for the last 10 years, but I think it's worth continuously looking at and really deciding, what the right level of response we are. We also know that regulators are being more onerous on what they will call the end of the response, what clean looks like, and what they're requiring you to do on a response has certainly been ratcheted up, basically because the public are very concerned about them, as we saw with this recent incident here in the UK. Got a lot of attention, and I know, you know, I see press reports almost daily from other responses around the globe, and they get a lot of attention. So something to be wary of.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I mean, I agree that, look, there's a big range of operators out there and their capabilities and resources, but that's the way it's always been. I'm not sure. You know, a company like ExxonMobil has a pretty robust response team, and we have dedicated responders. But I'm not sure leaning on the OSRL and the oil spill response organizations is not necessarily a bad thing. I think it's a good thing because it's your full-time business, right? And I always think of you know, if you go to the emergency room with a heart attack, you want every emergency room to be doing the best practice protocols, right? And you don't want to have a diversity of protocols. And so that's where the OSROs can make sure that the response is using the best practices and the most experienced, knowledgeable people. So leaning on the OSROs, I think puts this kind of best practices and consistency and knowledge, and make sure that from the ExxonMobils all the way down to the very small organizations, because small organization can have significant events as well, and make sure that there is consistency and the right expertise is brought to the issue at hand. Okay, well, listen, I think that gets us through the questions. Once again, Robert, I really appreciate you taking the time to do that. I got a lot out of this talk. I think I had more questions written on my little notebook here from your talk than just about any of the others. So it at least spurred my mind to think a little bit. So I think unless there's some last words, Lynn, is there anything else is there anything I forgot to mention?
No, we are good.
Okay, Robert, any final thoughts before we call it a day?
No, just thank you for the opportunity to participate, and I hope it was of some use to people, and obviously keep talking and keep the dialogue going, because you know, it's all about knowledge really at the end of the day.
Yep. All right, well, listen, good luck in retirement, and I'm sure we'll be talking to you even after retirement. All right, thank you, everybody.
Thanks.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
All right, Lynn.